Welcome back to Knowledge is Kings. I am Kings, guys. And a couple of years ago, maybe a year ago, I was commissioned to build a couple of floating shelves made out of white oak. And that same company, it's a coffee and bike shop here in Arizona, now wants more shelves that are floating. So I'm going to show you how to build those. Now, I already had two made for them that were going to be painted, but now they want those covered in a white oak veneer as well as building another long one for them. So I'm going to be showing you how to build the floating shelf and how to put a veneer on it. And the floating shelf is going to be very basic, very simple. It's just going to consist of 1x on each side with plywood tops and bottoms to create a hollow frame. And then to put that on the wall, I'm going to have basically it's like a half of a wall section that fits inside of this. But I want to give you a couple of tips on how to make this in a way that makes your life so much easier when it comes to put this on it and when it comes to hanging it. Let's get to it. I have my plywood here, which is an AC grade plywood. So one face is very flat and all the voids are filled in, and on the back side, it really doesn't look that good. But that doesn't matter as long as that stays to the inside. So when I put this together, I need to remember to put the terrible looking side facing in the box. And now here at the table saw, I want my finished shelf to be about 12 inches in depth, but I'm gonna be adding this 1x to it, so I can take 3/4 of an inch off of the dimension of 12. But when I'm cutting plywood on the table saw, especially for the first couple of rips, sometimes the sheet can be a little cumbersome to work with. So what I like to do is set the table saw to a 1/16 or an 1/8 bigger than the cut I need. That way, once I have a smaller strip, I can then set it to the final dimension. It's a lot easier to handle the smaller strip. Now, I could use these Jessam, I'm actually not sure what these are called, rip guides or something, because these will not only hold my piece down, but the wheels on them are slightly tapered, so it keeps it tight against the fence. So even if I tried to keep it away from the fence, it would pull it back there. So I could use those so I wouldn't have that issue, but I know a lot of people don't have them, so I'm just giving you a tip on what you can do to make sure that you don't mess up a rip on a plywood piece. They get long, I know it's easy to push them through straight, but just a little deviance makes a little divot out of it. And now for these shelves, it won't really matter as much since they're gonna be covered in a veneer. You won't see any deviations like that, but I just wanna let you know that that's how I keep my cuts straight when I'm starting off with a big piece of plywood, which sometimes can be cumbersome. And yes, there are other options to cutting big pieces of plywood, so you don't have to deal with it like a track saw, but a lot of people don't have that either. All right, let's cut this thing. Not the miter saw. The best way to make sure that these are both the same length is to flush up the other end and cut them at the same time. I'm back at the table saw here, and I've set the dado blade in to get a 3/8 of an inch wide cut, and I've tilted the blade 22.5 degrees. And here's my test piece here. Just cut this out with a little bit of an angle. So if you imagine if this is the bottom of one of the shelves, if I put an LED strip in here, it shines at the shelf right below it. And here are the LED strips here. And I've made it just deep enough so that you will not be able to see the lights from the side. Let's see if I can get this to focus here. So these LEDs will be just at a slant and at a place where they're just hidden. Now I'm going to put that groove in this plywood edge first, and I need to make sure I do it with the outside facing down. So that's this one. It's going to be down like this, and I want to do it now before I put my edge banding on there so that the groove doesn't go all the way through my banding. This is just a test piece here. So I'm going to make that groove now. Now I'm sure you noticed I was using these push blocks here. They kind of have a grippy bottom. And the reason for that is this plywood does not sit flat. And what I didn't want was for some of the plywood to get a groove and some not because it hooped up. So I was using this, which when I'm pushing, you can see these handles are angled and I have that towards the fence. So as I'm pushing, I'm not only pushing down, but I'm pushing towards the fence. This way I keep pressure down so the plywood's tight and the grip helps me push it through so it's perfect groove all the way through. Plus it keeps my hand safe from having to press right above the blade here. If it accidentally came through for whatever reason, it would hit this instead of my hand, which would be no good. So I've cut the 1x that I'm going to put around the 3 edges, and I have the first plywood piece being held up by this clamp so it doesn't fall over while I'm working it. And I'm just going to put glue on this front edge and add this banding to it, making sure to keep it flush the whole way while I nail it in. Now, if anything, I'd rather have it sit past just a little, and I can always sand it down flush. If I have the plywood sticking past, it's a lot harder to sand this down to get it flush with this than it would be to sand this down to get it flush with the plywood. So I'm going to put some glue on here and start nailing this down, making sure to keep it flush. So before I put this next piece on here, I need to make a mark where the end of this side is so that I have both sides lined up perfectly. Then I just repeat the process. So I had to add a few clamps here because I was just having some gap issues. The first piece, this 1x could sit right on it, so it was easy to get it tight. But the second piece, since my tabletop here is not flat at all, it was sitting up while this side was holding up, even though they're the exact same width. So I just added some clamps to tighten those gaps up. And now I'll just let it sit and dry, and then I'm going to put on the same piece, but the short ones on the sides. Now, while that glue dries, I want to make the frame that fits inside of the shelf. And the height of this, so here's my plywood. And then I have that 1x piece I just glued onto the front. This is 3.5 here. I need to get a measurement of this area inside there, and I just want to subtract a 1/16 so it fits in there smoothly. Once I have that dimension, I'm going to rip down 2 boards, one for the back and one for the studs, I'm going to call them, that fit inside the shelf. For the length of the backboard that goes all the way into the shelf, I want to mark it an inch smaller than the inside measurement of the shelf. I don't want to be so tight that I have difficulty getting it in. I want a little bit of wiggle room. And also, once I put 3 shelves on the wall, this will help me get them lined up better if what I mount to the wall isn't perfectly aligned on one side. This just gives me a little play. The same thing goes for the studs that I'm going to put on the inside. I'm going to keep them an inch short, and I made a mark on my miter saw here because although I have a stop set up, it won't reach that far. So to make shorter cuts, I just put a little mark right there and line it up every time. All right, I have all the studs cut, but I want to do two things before I screw it together. And the first one is to put a 45-degree miter on each of the pieces. This will not only give me a wire area to run for my lights inside the box, but it's also going to make the box a lot easier to get on. If it was just square like this, and you saw how the plywood goes convex, it can clamp down. I have to try to stretch it over each stud. This just makes it way easier. It can just split in there and then bring it wider as you push it on. Now that I have these pieces cut, the second thing I want to do before I put this together is to put a chamfer on both sides of where the stud pieces will attach to the back piece. We'll do that with the router. This chamfer acts in the same way as cutting the angle on this piece. For when we want to put the shelf on there, this can kind of open it up and then sit over there. But when you get in between these studs, the plywood can kind of bend down a little bit, squeezing together, making it hard to get on. So in that same way, with this chamfer, the shelf can kind of be forced open to go over it. The chamfer just really helps it to go on a lot easier. So it's not something you necessarily have to do. You could try to pry it open as you're getting on there, but once you get the shelf onto this point, it's kind of hard to get your hand behind there. And you'll see what I'm talking about when we mount this to the wall. Now I just need to lay this out, and the layout's nothing special. I'm just going to evenly space it on this back piece here, and then we'll screw and glue it together. Skipping ahead here, I have all of the little studs screwed to this back piece. And I just did that. It's a lot easier to screw them on and then unscrew them and then put glue on there rather than making a big mess of putting glue on there, trying to pre-drill it, trying to get screws in there, and glue's getting everywhere. So I have it screwed, but I'm going to show you, I'm going to take them off one by one, put glue on them and screw them back together. And to glue them, this is kind of a little half bottle here, but I'm going to use PL 3X polyurethane glue. This stuff is incredibly strong and will definitely be able to hold this up for a long time. So when I screwed this on, I just used these little 1.5 inch long screws. And this bottle here is old. The tip was too clogged and broken to be able to use, so I'm just gonna put a little on a stick and put it on here. I've put plastic on my workbench here just so I don't get it covered in glue. Okay, I'm back at the actual shelf. I have the clamps off now. This is the next day. So all the glue is set up, and I'm gonna add this piece to the end. You can see I've left this one long, and I'll just cut it flush after this is on. Now that I have this side done, I'm going to do it to the other side, and then we're going to be ready for putting the veneer on. So I'm just spending the next few minutes here cutting the veneer to the sizes that I need. And I'm cutting them about 1/2 inch over what I need so I can trim them to fit once they're on. And to do this, I'm just using a chalk line with a light purple chalk that wipes off very easily, and a knife. Maybe hard to see the chalk line, but it is there. It may look like I'm not really snapping anything other than the excess that's running here, but there is a line there. This is just a line that easily wipes away. Okay, now that I have my piece cut here, this piece is all ready to go. I'm going to use this DAP contact cement to glue together. Okay, now that I have the stuff on there, I just gotta let it sit for a few minutes to tack up, and then I'll show you how I'm gonna stick it on there. And always wear masks when you do this. This stuff stinks. Okay, now that this is tacked up here, I'm gonna put little spacers in between it, which will allow me to get this lined up, and then pull the spacers out one by one. For the ends that I already have the oak veneer on top, I put a layer of tape down there for two reasons. One, when I put my roller on of the glue, I don't want any to get on this side or this side. I have tape on the bottom as well. And when I run my router on this, I don't want that spinning blade to be close to the veneer where it could burn it or make a smooth looking mark in it. So this protects against those two things. You can see I accidentally did get some glue on this as I was rolling it. It moved on my table and went into a glue spot. So I will be able to sand that down. Just when you're on veneer, you have to be really careful as it's incredibly thin. But I'll let that dry up and then sand that off. So that mark right there that's made by the router bit is exactly what I wanted to avoid being on the wood. And then for these corners, I'm just going to take a file and smooth them out. And there you go. That's how you make a real just nice corner with the veneer. Let's see if I can get a better close up here. Just makes a real nice corner, and it's hard to tell where the two pieces come together. It looks really nice. Now that I have that done, I'm gonna continue doing that on the bottom. I gotta do the other side, and then I'll do the front side the same way. And then this one is done, ready for hanging. I should say I did carve out this LED strip spot. I forgot to record that, but I have 2 more of these I have to build, so I'll show that on the next one. So working with my second one here, now that I have the other one finished, you can see my cut for the LED on this one went all the way through because these were already built. They were intended to be painted, but now they want to cover it in the white oak. So when I'm cutting this out, I don't want to cut all the way through because I don't want to see that from the side. So what I did here is I have a mark here and here for the sides of it, and then a mark in 3/4, and that's where I'm going to stop my cut. To mark this depth, I'm just going to set up this little stop and just mark it with my pencil all the way down. Then I'm just going to use a knife to cut this out. Being careful not to bend this as there's really nothing under it now. So I'm going to end up having to try to fill something in here so this isn't so weak. But now I just need to cut this strip out of this whole thing, following this line with my knife. And there we have it. It's cut out, ready for the LED strip. Once the LED strip has been cut out, I want to go over all of this with 240 volt. Once this has been covered with veneer and the LED track has been cut out, I want to go over everything with a 240 grit sandpaper just to smooth it out. The veneer could be a little bit smoother. And then just to ease the edges over just a little bit more so they're nice and smooth and there's no risk of getting splinters or anything. Now this customer does not want to put any finish on this, so this is as far as it's going to go in terms of finish, just sanding it down. But then we're going to flip this over, sand that as well, and then I'll show you how I put the LED strip in the track. And I'm sanding at a low to moderate speed. I thought I'd point that out. I'm not trying to remove tons of material, which is why I have a high grit in there, because this veneer is very thin. So don't just go hog wild crazy, full speed ahead, 80 grit sandpaper, high grit, lower speed, just to smooth it out. I'm not trying to remove any material. All right, so with this LED strip, it is extremely easy to install as it's self-adhesive, but you just gotta be careful. This is very weird how they have this red and black wire here, which you think is power going into this, but it's not. It's the red and black wires at the end that's power going in. This is power going out to the next LED strip. Now, there are gonna be 3 shelves, but each of them are gonna be wired individually, so I don't have any wires coming from one shelf going to the other from the LEDs. So when you put these in, just make sure you know which one of these wires are power going in. It would be a mistake if I put this in because I have to cut this to length. So I'm essentially cutting off one end. So I've tested this at my electronics bench to see which one's power going in. I don't have the module that powers these yet. The customer hasn't gotten that to me, but I tested it. This one doesn't do anything, and this one lights it up. So I need to unwind it and feed this end in first. Real simple for this. I'm just going to drill in a hole right at the end. just feed my wire in through here. And just peel back this self-adhesive barrier. Pull this down tight and push this in. Then once we get to the end here, just want to cut it off right on this copper section. Then I go back and just kind of press it in. Now that the LED strips are in, all that's left to do is take it to my office and test it. So I have the wires hooked up here just with some alligator clamps. And they're hooked up to my benchtop power supply here. And these take 12 volts. Perfect. They're working. Let's see if I dim it down when they actually turn off. So they need at least 8 volts. And at 12 volts, they have about a 2.5 amp draw just in those 2 strips. Seems like a lot. Oh well. All right, so these are ready for install. So I got all my stuff brought over to the coffee shop, and thankfully they made me a coffee. It's a good way to start the day. It's Sunday morning here, so I'm just ready to get started. You can see the wall behind me where we're gonna put the shelves and my toolbox. So we're ready to go, just not until I finish my coffee. This might be a while. Might have to wait till tomorrow. This is good stuff. This is good coffee. This is a coffee shop here in Arizona where they actually roast the coffees to perfection, not like that Star Dollar place where they burn the coffees crisp and then call it coffee. I suppose I better actually get some work done. So to get started, the very first thing I do is I'm gonna set my height. Now, I already have these wires wired in here, and these are wired to the lights so that whenever the lights are on, the shelves are on. That sounds weird, the shelves are on. The shelf lights are on. So I'm just gonna get my wire basically centered in there. I have a mark where the top is gonna be here. Now I can just get my laser out and get a line across here for the first shelf. So now I have a level line, I have my marks. and I have the start of where my shelf is going to be, or where the support for the shelf will be. So what I want to do next is find all the studs, and I'm going to do that with this stud finder. Works really nice. You just turn it on, and anywhere where there's lights, this is the whole stud right there from this side to this side. So I just mark the center light, and there's a stud, and I just slide it over till I see another one. And the reason it's getting a wide light like that is because this used to have an opening that they just filled in, and there was some studs here covered in drywall, and the drywallers added another stud right here, so that's why I'm getting a really wide mark. So this whole thing is actually full of studs right there. And then nothing till the end, but my mark is starting here, so I won't have a stud there. With those studs marked there, I just want to bring my supports over, get it lined up with the end, and mark all of the studs so I can pre-drill them. Okay, so I have all the holes pre-drilled, and I have the wire pre-drilled as well. And when you're mounting a shelf like this by yourself, the easiest way to do is to start with the center screw. Because once you get that in, it self-balances, so you don't have to try to hold it. If you try to do one side, the other side will be falling on you. So get this center screw in, and it'll stay up by itself. Then we can just move on to the next ones. Now you'll notice on this, I'm only putting screws on the top. And that's because since this is essentially cantilevered over, all the weight pulling down will force this into the wall and pull this away. So I only care about the screws on the top. So I have the first shelf on, and there's a large gap on this side. It goes tight right here, and then a large gap on this side. So what we need to do is scribe a line on here that matches this wall, and we'll grind out the high spots. The easiest way to do that is with this little scribing tool. This will ride alongside the wall, and this will mark the same line all the way across. So what I do is I get the gaps about equal on both sides, and then I'll set this tool to that gap. And once that matches, I'm going to slide this across the wall. Nope, let me try that again. Slide this across the wall. I had it tipped there. And there we go. Once the pencil line disappears, you're good, and you can see where it hits the wall here. The line is in the farthest, so that's where I'm going to take out the most to make up for this hump there. So now normally I would use a belt sander to sand down to this line, but I'm curious if a grinder with a sanding disc on it will work just as well. I'm curious to see if that'll do it faster. So I'm going to try that. If this doesn't work, I'll go back to the belt sander that I normally use. Okay, so I forgot to hit record, but I did try the grinder, and that's a no-go. It just seems to kind of be burning it, and it's removing material very slowly. So it's back to the belt sander. And apparently my belt sander just fell apart. A little bolt just fell out of there. So that's nice. Once we have it sanded down, and I did the bottom side as well, you can see it's a lot. Now I still have a little pencil there, but it's a lot better than it was. I'm gonna have to sand a little bit down there, but now that gap is about even all the way across, and you could tell where the big hump was originally here or there. It's not holding it away from the wall anymore. So it just looks like a nice thin little gap. Now, if this were a kitchen countertop, even if you had a slight little gap there, you could caulk it and kind of hide it. Now, I think this is small enough where it's fine, as it's just going to be for display, and there'll be lots of products sitting here, so no one's going to be looking at the back. But before, that huge gap that was there was just unacceptable. Now this little one looks real nice. So I took the shelf off again because I need to wire in an outlet for these little boxes. So each of the LEDs is going to be connected to this box, and this needs to be plugged in. So I'm going to put a little outlet here, and I'm just taking one of these very shallow boxes, and I'm just going to center it on here and use these wide-headed screws to screw it in, and then put an outlet in. Then for the cover, I'm just using one that doesn't stick past any of the edges, as this just fits in there the way it is. And the outlet is done. So it looks like to connect this to the box, just take this cap off and feed these wires here into there. Now with this all wired up, this is ready to get put on, but I want to attach all the brackets for the other shelves to the wall first. It took some time, but I finally have all of the pieces sanded, scribed to the wall, all the outlets in, and of course, obviously, all the brackets up. So now I'm going to show you how I put these on here and get it plugged in here. Super simple, probably figured it out without this, but I'm going to show you anyway. All right, so I just want to kind of get one side on here and then kind of reach in here, find the plug. It's right here. And just make sure that it's in the same bay as the outlet. Then I just have to make sure I'm just reaching in here, trying to feel where that transformer is, because I need that to be centered between two of these. So it's right here. I just don't want it to be split right in one, and when I try to push it, I smash it. Then I can just plug this in and tuck the wire back in here and slip it on. And it just goes on super simply. These grooves here that we cut allow the wire to just get pushed into the little corner right here, so it can come all the way from the one side, then we hit the little transformer, stays in between one, and then goes all the way to here. So this creates just like a little triangular chase for this. And that's how it's done. Now I just got two more to put in there, and I'll just tack some little black screws from the bottom here, just one on each side to hold it. Doesn't need much, just to stop it from sliding this way. And then on the top one, since I'll be able to see the bottom, I'm actually gonna put the tacks on the top. Now I just have to put a couple of tacks in it like I was saying before, and then they can put their product on it, and this project is done. I think it looks pretty cool. And here it is with all the product on it. I really love how this turned out. I love the way the LEDs, since they're tucked in there at an angle, give that little shadow line right above the shoes there. So you have just the product lit and then a little shadow. I think it adds a lot of depth and character. Well, that's it for this project. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Oh, I like that.